Hey, welcome to Little Book Stories. This is a limited series of 10 episodes, one per chapter of my little book of Big Reasons to Love America. And it's meant to sort of overflow from the chapter with insights, stories, maybe things that didn't make it into the book. So maybe you're reading the book and you click the QR code and you came here and you want to hear more, or you're watching this episode and you like some of the stuff that we talk about here and then you want to buy the book. Either way, welcome. This is chapter 5. I want to talk about prosperity. Normalized prosperity, more specifically. Here we go. Hey, if you enjoy my podcast, you're going to love my weekly newsletter. Every week, I share strategies for success and significance because, let's be honest, who doesn't want both? We're talking life-changing wisdom that has transformed my life and the lives of people I've coached all over the world. You can start with the free version, but if you upgrade to the paid version, you'll unlock exclusive perks like early access to my monthly webinars, interviews with top experts, and even a signed copy of my book. Subscribe at christianrayflores.com. Your future self will thank you. So this is something we don't think about often enough about the United States of America. 5% of the world's population, Americans, produce 25% of the world's GDP. It's really amazing, actually, right? And the reason I bring this up and the reason I want to bring up this topic of normalized prosperity is that we are the stories we tell ourselves. Who are we? What's the environment around us? Is the environment an environment of prosperity, of opportunity, of possibility? Or is this an environment that is constricting, limiting, that is robbing us from our future? And it basically sort of funnels us into the state of normalized poverty or scarcity. And the truth is, I think America is an incredible place where there's an opportunity to think of yourself as having agency, upward mobility, possibility, and an opportunity, not necessarily guaranteed because you choose what you think, to think of your environment as a place of freedom, of creativity, of entrepreneurship, and of prosperity. That is the baseline of America, and the contrast is pretty massive. And I think some of my stories are there to illustrate just how dramatically different the world is outside of America. And there's grades of it, right? There's the developed world, the Western world, the second world, the third world, however you want to call that. But let me tell you some stories to illustrate how that affects people on average, and how grateful we should be to be living in a place that doesn't have that unnecessary pressure, that unnecessary limiting factor. So, okay, let's talk about normalized poverty, right? Normalized poverty is where everybody's poor, or the vast majority of people are poor. So I grew up in a variety of countries like that, right? So, but one of them was, I came back to the Soviet Union with our family after being exiled, after experiencing a military coup, being in a refugee facility, and we sort of made it from there to Germany, then to the Soviet Union for a little bit before we went to Africa, and we'll talk about that as well. But imagine the Soviet Union. This is now the 70s, right? We show up there. The only place we can live in is this communal apartment. What's a communal apartment? Imagine an old Soviet building, bad state, no elevator. You walk to the 4th floor, you come in, everything is sort of decrepit. And there's a long hallway, and to the left, there's one bedroom that is, a elderly couple that were not related to us in any way, shape, or form. And then to the right, there's 2 joined bedrooms and rooms for the 4 of us, right? My mom, my dad, my sister, and I. And then we share the hallway, we share the bathroom, and we share kitchen. All of that is, shall we say, very modest, okay? So that is the place we lived. There's not enough clothes, there's not enough quality food, no one's hungry. But, my mom tells me that she would buy an orange and buy one orange and divide it between my sister and I, right? You can see the scarcity there. Everything is sort of mediocre. Everything. Like, I just remember being sick and the medical attention was horrible. I remember they had to do like an extraction of a tooth, and they didn't have any anesthesia. So they extracted a tooth, from a child with no anesthesia. Just you look back at it and you go, it's just, what is this, right? What world is this? It's supposed to be a modern country. And everything is just mediocre and gray, and there's no opportunity. So my dad gets a contract in Africa, and he's like a secular missionary, right? So they didn't pay him hardly anything, but they did provide like a state car, a sort of a nice townhome from the government, etc. So compared to the Soviet Union, our situation went up a little bit. But we were now in Mozambique. Mozambique is one of the poorest countries in the world. Still, over half of the population of Mozambique lived at the time, maybe 60%, on under $2 a day, which is sort of the official threshold of extreme poverty. Very, very dangerous. I mean, you can go hungry, you can starve to death, that kind of thing, right? Death rates super high. I think the average life expectancy at the time for men was 45. I'm pretty sure that was the case. And since then, it has improved some, but still over half of the population is poor 50 years later. So we'll go there and we see the extreme poverty. Now, let me give you some insights on how that felt like and looked like at the time. A Marxist government took over after the Portuguese left, so it was a Portuguese colony for 500 years or so. Not really colonized per se, but there were some cities that were built by the Portuguese. It's claimed by Portugal, but they didn't do a good job creating infrastructure, institutions, things like that, not compared to other powers like England, for example. That's a separate topic, but it was just underdeveloped in general. So the Portuguese leave. The government that comes in, they were in the bush fighting as independence fighters, and then now they have to run an economy. They don't know what to do with that. And then a lot of the people that were Portuguese, non-black Africans, they flee because of fear of persecutions. They did expropriate a lot of private property, all kinds of stuff like that. Not helpful for an economy, because the people who own property, they worked hard for that property most of the time. When you take them away from them, they're not motivated to stay and help. So a lot of people left. My dad comes off the airplane. He came ahead of us to sort of set things up, and he was hired to be an engineer at this transportation company, fleet of trucks transporting frozen foods throughout the country. The boss meets him at the airport. You want to see the company? Yeah. So he takes him to the thing. There's like buildings, official buildings, trucks, the whole thing, but no people. And my dad goes, "Hey, where are the people?" He goes, "Oh, it's just me, you, and the secretary. There's nobody else." And that was the state of the country when they arrived. Everything was paralyzed. So there was a bunch of people that came in, and a lot of them, for some reason, were Chileans. I think the Marxist government had a particular relationship with the Chilean Communist Party. So they imported all these expats that were basically thrown out of Chile. A lot of them came to help in Mozambique. So we had like 150 families total that were doing all kinds of things, running things, right? Helping the country. So it's almost like a secular missionary situation. They were not there to make money. They were actually there for the idea of helping this country get on their feet. Very noble. I learned a lot from my mom and dad about causes from that, is that sometimes you sacrifice material prosperity for the idea of service, and serving something bigger than yourself. That's sort of the thing that I took away as a character trait and helped me in my life. And then in some ways it didn't help me, because I would choose a cause over financial benefits, and that's not always wise. Okay, let's leave it at that. How was life in Mozambique? The natural resources that the country had. So we had a nice townhome type situation, like it's a duplex, and which had a fruit garden. So it was mangoes, papayas, what was there? Lemons, avocados, things like that. I mean, it's just growing there, and you could find it very cheaply in the market. Everything that grew naturally there, you can find it. And it was amazing, fresh, just absolutely delicious. Fish was abundant. Of course, my dad worked for for a frozen seafood company. So we had this massive freezer with fish and stuff like that. What was naturally there was available. What had to be sort of created, produced, was not. I mean, my dad told me in a recent conversation, in the beginning, we had to literally go to a different city who had a baker who made good bread and would go there to get bread. And then locally, we had food ration cards for certain things. I remember we had food ration cards for bread. That was this really like one type of bread. It was sort of gray, just very sus, right? And then rice. We would get rice, and when you're in Africa, you can hire a local person to help you in the kitchen, whatever, right? So we had a housemaid type person, and it's really normal in the third world, by the way. It's actually considered a responsibility to take care of somebody else. And so this maid would go and get that ration food. And one of the things that happened, I remember that very clearly, that the rice came in and it had bugs in it. So before you cook the rice, you manually had to go through all the rice and take out the bugs, and then you wash the rice, and then you cook the rice. But that was sort of our normal life. There was no cheese for some reason. They didn't have the facilities to do that. Milk, they didn't know how to herd cattle. They didn't have a lot of cattle there. So there's all kinds of very strange things that happened. I remember that I realized way later as an adult that I don't remember stores like toy stores or electronics stores, or clothing stores with brands of any kind. I mean, there were people that were so close but didn't have stores for clothing. I mean, it was just hard for me to even imagine. I had to call my dad and say, hey, am I missing something, or were there no stores there? And he goes, yeah, there were no stores there. There was this one store for expats for hard currency stuff, right, where you can buy some stuff. So there were no stores there. Imagine a world where there is no stores in a capital city. That's where we lived for 7 years. And that's how I grew up. And, you found ways to buy stuff. Like, for example, we would take our Jeep. We had this Land Rover, and we would take it to like one of those Defender types, like pure aluminum, no electronics. Like there's no AC. You have to like open like a little hatch to get air, one of those. And we would drive it to the neighboring country, Swaziland, which was not a Marxist country. And we would stock up literally the whole car all the way to the roof and above, like on a rack, food items that we couldn't buy locally, and we would just stock up for whatever, 2-3 months or something like that. Or anything fancy that we would buy. Like I couldn't buy a bicycle. And my dad got me a BMX bike, and I was like the richest kid on the block because I had a BMX bike. Things like that. So that was sort of the norm. That was the baseline. And just to give you an insight on, okay, yeah, but this was temporary right after the Portuguese left. They were rebuilding the country, et cetera, et cetera. Literally right now, because I'm still connected to Mozambique, we have an after-school academy there called the Ascend Academy, where we help kids from the slums of Mozambique to get English, character, and computer literacy skills. So I'm connected there. I follow the news. I have friends there. And this week, as of the recording of this, the same party has been in power uninterrupted for almost 50 years. I think it's going to be 50 years next year, 2025, June. And because of that, there's no change in power. There's no motivation. There's no competition. And they had an election that was claimed by lots of international sort of agencies as rigged. And the opposition is claiming, this thing is all false. So as I'm recording this, the capital city, Maputo, is literally on fire. They're burning tires, they're protesting, they're looting, because people are just fed up with bad governance. And the reason I tell you this story is that when I go there, I go to Mozambique every couple of years. It's a very peaceful country, fairly safe, actually, and people are just incredibly kind. You can see how bad governance creates this learned scarcity, this learned poverty mindset because they don't know anything else, right? The local population, they know this is it. This is our roof. of income. These are opportunities that will never be there. There's maybe somewhere far away in places like America, that sort of thing. And I want you to understand, much of the world experiences this. It's actually artificial scarcity, artificial poverty that is learned by people and accepted by people because the whole environment, the governance, the constellation of facts that provide a prosperous country, it's just not there. And it's almost impossible to just turn something like that around. It's very rare that it happens. It does happen, but it's very rare that it happens. So let's take one step further. We go back to the USSR. My parents got divorced. And same thing, right? It's not Africa. It's like theoretically the second world. So no one's hungry, no one's homeless, no one's starving, none of those things. But it's sort of mediocrity central. All the buildings are bad shape. Everybody's poor, but no one is extremely poor. Everybody's poor, and no one's rich, right? There's no upward mobility at all. In private business, private property, pretty much illegal with very few instances of exceptions. Entrepreneurship is illegal. Lack of freedom. I described all of this in previous episodes, but the result of it is what I want to highlight to you. So we go back. Of course, we had a car, a little, duplex condo, which was actually quite nice. And I go back. My mom's a single mom with me and my sister. We live in this one-bedroom apartment. So my mom sleeps in the bedroom. My sister sleeps in the living room. I sleep in the kitchen for years. And we had some clothes. They're sort of low-quality clothes, but we had some clothes. We were sort of on the upper echelon of quote-unquote Soviet middle class because I had a VCR, right? And I had a foreign-produced TV set that was like super bougie, right? Because we were able to, in contrast with many other people, leave the country because I had dual citizenship. So I was the first one who had a video game console that connected to the VCR. Remember those who you would load software from like a cassette recorder? It was called ZX Spectrum. It was an English thing that was sort of the competitor of Commodore 64, and it was like the most basic video games. And I was like the cool kid in the school because of that. But think about how normal that was in America at the time to have one of those. Everybody had one of those, VCR, whatever, and how abnormal that was in the Soviet Union. And I was like the cool kid because I had access to these one or two little extra things. That's it. We had no car. I would take metro, go to the metro, walk to the metro, then take a tram, then walk to school. And the whole thing was, at the very least, maybe an hour in each direction, right? That was sort of the gist of it. It was not the worst, actually. When I went to college, okay, let me describe that to you a little bit later. It was we upgraded because of some of the entrepreneurial stuff that we did. We upgraded to an apartment that had 2 bedrooms. Now I had my own bedroom, which was amazing. And to go to college, I would basically get up, and the weather just is terrible in Russia, right? So in the winter especially, it's like pitch dark. Get up, get out. I walk probably 10 minutes to the bus stop. It was like the final bus stop, and it's like a blizzard. And it's dark. The bus comes in, and it was like this horrible Soviet bus. The windows are frozen from the inside. Actual ice on the inside because it's a final station, and all that breath that sort of fills the bus now becomes ice. So you sit there, I'm like maybe 3 or 4 other people, that's it. And I think it took about 45 minutes to get to my college. Like I think I timed it even, and then you walk back, and then you go to college, then you go to the library to study because it has a little bit more room. Then I get out of university probably by 4 p.m. It's pitch dark again. That was my life, right? You get used to these things. I look back and I go, no way, I couldn't have. Now I can't even imagine this, but you get used. There's an acceptance of things that happens because everybody lives a certain way. So I started going to the States. I visited the first time. It was this before we got married and everything, and I just remember going, this is like a different planet, right? But because I visited, and I came back, it's sort of a blip. You get to observe certain things. That's it. But then, I married an American. Her name's Deb. She's from Wisconsin. Her parents at the time lived in Colorado. So we go to Colorado now and we stay for longer, like Christmas holidays, things like that. And I remember I had a series of culture shock adjustments to my system. And I'm saying this to you, especially to those of you who live in America, because you need to understand what the baseline is for you. It's not normal for most people. So Deb wanted to buy a toy for Mocha, which was a little Yorkie back in Moscow. So we go to Petco. She's like, oh, let's go to Petco. I'm like, all right, let's go to Petco. So we come in, and I literally had a panic attack in Petco because I realized that you have a supermarket for pets, like a whole big thing. And I understood the concept of a pet sort of store. I get that. But when I saw the size of it, the variety, the sheer just quantity of things that are available, I was just paralyzed. And I stormed out of the store. Deb follows me into the parking lot. She goes, what's up? What's up? I'm like, basically borderline hyperventilating. I was so upset. And I go, you have a supermarket for pets? And she goes, yeah. And I said, you realize there's people that are going hungry and you have a supermarket for pets. I don't understand what to do with this. And it was pretty emotional, And then, I go to Petco all the time now. But my point is, do you see how separately, it's a separate universe almost, right? And then later we moved to the US, and I had sort of an interesting, just a really inspiring moment. Deb takes me to a little town she grew up in, Wisconsin, called Horicon, Wisconsin, population 3,500. It's like literally in the middle of nowhere type place. And what moved me so deeply is that we would drive around, we'd go to the diner, we went to her high school, and I would see a town in the middle of nowhere with good roads, with decent houses, beautiful houses, just middle class, but it's extreme luxury from the world that I came from. The high school she went to, we toured it, and it was like this gleaming, impeccable, beautiful place that I've never seen in any of the cities that I've lived in as a normal high school. And I was moved to tears, and I said, Deb, this is so good. And I said, a country that can produce this kind of quality of life for normal people. It's an exceptional country. It's an exceptional country. And I said, I'm so inspired by this. And this part of the reason why I wrote the book is because I kept saying and seeing things like this and saying to Deb, hey, this is amazing, and this is why. But I want to tell you this because you go to any third world country, maybe Western Europe is sort of the exception, but actually you can see almost like shades of that as well. And most of the wealth is focused on one city, two cities maximum, right? And you literally go 50 to 100 miles away from the capital city, and the quality of life just drops off a cliff. Like it just drops off a cliff so dramatically into poverty or into extreme poverty. And in some places like Mozambique, it's like extreme poverty to the degree of, this is how people lived not 100 years ago, but 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 years ago, and they still live like this. This is how they live, And if you want any semblance of civilization, of prosperity, you have to go to the capital. And even there, it's just a very thin layer of people who lived anything that is even remotely comparable to the average person in the United States of America. Now, I tell you this not to discourage you, but to paint a picture of reality. And also to tell you that if you live in the United States and you don't feel abundant and don't feel that you have the power to change your situation in life, you should definitely have a reset of perspective. If you don't think that that your environment offers you opportunity to improve your life in incredible ways, you should have a reset of perspective. You have this illusion of limited resources, but compared to most of the world, you don't really lack resources here. You lack resourcefulness. And part of the reason why I do performance coaching is because I have this fierce clarity about the illusion of limited resources. And in spite of the things that I've seen throughout my life, I learned from American culture, the mindset of prosperity, of possibility, of entrepreneurial sort of grit, how to build a life. And I was able to do that years before I actually moved here. And when I did move here, I've been here for now 20 years plus. I feel so blessed, so grateful to be in a place that offers this kind of opportunity. And we should protect it. We should understand that prosperity is not guaranteed. And there's sort of this very delicate balance of important things that happen here, which is the previous chapters that I talked about accepting immigrants, about freedom, about creativity, about entrepreneurship. And then we'll talk about some other things in the next chapters, in the next videos. But I really truly hope that this episode inspires you to, first of all, see that if you live in America, you are at an incredible advantage. And even if you feel like you lack resources, you actually probably lack resourcefulness. And that maybe that gives you a motivation that you can change your situation in incredible ways in this country. All you have to do is sort of shift your perspective and get to work and seize opportunities and see opportunities and get the help if you need to get the help. That's part of the reason I do performance coaching, is because I want people to just live up to the potential in a place that offers so much potential, right? So thank you for listening. I hope to see you in another episode, and I hope you buy the book.